Karen Simmons gripped the phone, her knuckles turning white. "Yes, officer, there's a disturbance at my neighbor's farm. His rooster won't stop crowing, and it's keeping me up all night." She paused, her brow furrowed. "No, I've already spoken to him about it. He refuses to do anything." Her eyes narrowed as she listened to the dispatcher's response. "Well, then you need to make him stop. I have rights too, you know. This is a peaceful neighborhood, and I won't tolerate that incessant noise any longer." Karen's lips pursed as she ended the call, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. She glanced out the window at the quaint farm next door, where the offending rooster continued its cacophonous chorus. "That'll teach him," she muttered under her breath. Across the fence, Jacob Williamson wiped the sweat from his brow, surveying the rows of vegetables and the small chicken coop where his prized rooster strutted. He'd spent years cultivating this modest farm, and the thought of losing it terrified him. When the police cruiser pulled into his driveway, Jacob's heart sank. He strode over, his calloused hands clenched at his sides. "What's the problem, officers?" The younger of the two officers cleared his throat. "We've received a complaint about your rooster, sir. Your neighbor says the noise is keeping her up at night." Jacob's jaw tightened. "That rooster is essential to the running of my farm. I can't just get rid of him." He shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. "Why don't you tell Karen to use some earplugs or white noise machine?" The older officer raised a hand. "I'm afraid we have to cite you, sir. Local ordinances prohibit excessive noise that disturbs the peace. If you don't find a way to quiet the rooster, you could face fines or further action." Jacob's eyes widened in disbelief as the officers handed him a ticket. This is ridiculous. He watched helplessly as they climbed back into the car and drove away, leaving him to confront the looming problem. Marching back to the farmhouse, Jacob found his wife, Sarah, tending to the vegetable garden. "You'll never guess what just happened," he said, his voice laced with anger. Sarah straightened, wiping her dirt-stained hands on her overalls. "What is it, dear?" "Karen called the cops on us. On our rooster." Jacob threw up his hands in exasperation. "They issued me a citation for excessive noise. Can you believe the nerve of that woman?" Sarah's brow furrowed with concern. "Oh no. What are we going to do? We can't afford another fine, not with the way the crops have been struggling this year." Jacob's eyes narrowed as he stared back at the manicured lawn of the Simmons residence. "I'm not going to let her bully us out of our own home. This isn't over." The next morning, Jacob emerged from the farmhouse, his face set with determination. He made his way to the chicken coop, his steps brisk and purposeful. Reaching into the enclosure, he gently lifted the rooster and carried him to the edge of the property near the Simmons fence line. "I'm sorry, buddy," Jacob murmured, "but you're going to have to keep it down from now on." He set the rooster down, watching as the bird shook out its feathers and let out a few tentative clucks. Returning to the house, Jacob found Sarah in the kitchen, sipping a cup of coffee. "What did you do?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. "I moved the rooster to the far side of the property, near Karen's fence," Jacob explained. "Hopefully, that'll keep the noise down and prevent any more trouble from the HOA." Sarah's expression softened, and she reached out to squeeze his hand. "I know how much that rooster means to you. I hope this works." Just then, a loud knock came from the front door. Jacob exchanged a worried glance with Sarah before making his way to the entryway. Pulling the door open, he found himself face to face with a stern-looking woman in a crisp business suit. "Mr. Williamson, I'm Melissa Flores, the president of the Oakwood Homeowners Association. We've received a complaint that your rooster is still causing a disturbance. I'm afraid I'm going to have to issue you a formal warning." Jacob's jaw tightened. "I've already taken steps to address the issue. I moved the rooster to the far side of the property, away from Mrs. Stiven's home." Melissa's brow furrowed. "That's all well and good, but the fact remains that the rooster is still audible from her property." I'm afraid I have no choice but to impose a fine if the noise continues. But that's not fair, Jacob protested. I'm doing everything I can to keep the rooster quiet. Shouldn't you be talking to Karen about her unreasonable demands? Melissa's expression remained impassive. The HOA's responsibility is to maintain the peace and harmony of the neighborhood. If your rooster is disrupting that, then it's your problem to solve. She paused, her gaze unwavering. You have 1 week to find a permanent solution, Mr. Williamson. After that, the fines will start accumulating. With that, Melissa turned on her heel and strode back to her car, leaving Jacob standing in the doorway, his frustration and disbelief palpable. Jacob slammed the door behind him, his hands shaking with anger. "Can you believe the nerve of that woman?" he exclaimed, his voice laced with frustration. Sarah placed a calming hand on his arm. "I know, dear, but we can't let them bully us like this. We have to do something." Jacob paced the living room, his mind racing. "I can't just get rid of the rooster. He's an essential part of our farm. And I'll be damned if I let Karen and her precious HOA drive us out of our own home." Suddenly, an idea struck him. "That's it," he exclaimed, his eyes lighting up. "I'll take them to court. Sue the HOA for harassment and abuse of power." Sarah's eyes widened. "Do you really think that will work? Lawsuits can be expensive, and we're already struggling to make ends meet." Jacob nodded emphatically. "It's worth a shot. We can't just roll over and let them trample all over our rights. I'm going to call a lawyer first thing in the morning." The next day, Jacob sat across from a stern-faced attorney, his brow furrowed with determination. "So, you're telling me that the HOA is threatening to fine you for a rooster that's essential to your farm's operation?" Jacob nodded. "That's right. And they're doing it at the behest of my neighbor, Karen Simmons, who's made it her personal mission to get rid of the rooster." The attorney leaned back in his chair, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "Well, Mr. Williamson, I think you have a strong case for harassment and abuse of power. The HOA has a responsibility to balance the interests of all homeowners, not just cater to the demands of one resident." Jacob felt a glimmer of hope. "So you think we can win?" The attorney nodded. "I believe so. However, this kind of legal battle can be costly and drawn out. Are you prepared to see it through, even if it means risking your farm?" Jacob's expression hardened. "I don't have a choice. This is my livelihood, my home. I can't just let them bully me into submission. I'm ready to fight." The attorney leaned forward, a hint of a smile on his face. "All right then, let's get started." Over the next few weeks, the battle lines were drawn. Jacob and Sarah worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and preparing their case against the Oakwood Homeowners Association. Meanwhile, Karen Simmons continued her relentless campaign, filing increasingly strident complaints and demanding that the HOA take decisive action. The tension in the neighborhood palpably thickened as neighbors began to take sides. Some sympathized with the Williamsons, recognizing the importance of their small farm and the unfairness of the HOA's actions. Others, however, sided with Karen, arguing that the rooster's crowing was an unacceptable nuisance that needed to be addressed. One evening, as Jacob was tending to the chickens, he heard a commotion coming from the direction of the Simmons residence. Stepping out of the coop, he witnessed a shocking sight. Karen was standing on her porch, screaming at a group of men who appeared to be working on the power lines that ran along the property line. Rushing over, Jacob approached the scene cautiously. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Karen whirled around, her face flushed with rage. "These men are here to cut the power to your farm," she spat. "I've had enough of your rooster's incessant crowing, and the HOA has agreed to take drastic measures to silence it." Jacob's eyes widened in horror. "You can't be serious. That would cripple my entire operation." One of the utility workers stepped forward, a sheepish expression on his face. "I'm sorry, sir, but we've been instructed to disconnect the power to your property. It's for the good of the neighborhood." Jacob opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, a familiar voice rang out. "Not so fast, gentlemen." Turning, Jacob saw Melissa Flores, the HOA president, striding towards them, her expression grim. "Mrs. Simmons, I'm afraid I can't allow you to proceed with this course of action," Melissa said, her voice stern. "Cutting off power to the Williamsons' farm would be a gross abuse of the HOA's authority, and I won't be party to it." Karen's face contorted with fury. "But you said you would do something about that infernal rooster," she shrieked. Melissa held up a hand, silencing her. "I'm aware of the complaints, Mrs. Simmons, but the HOA cannot arbitrarily deprive the Williamsons of their property rights or livelihood. We need to find a lawful and reasonable solution." Jacob felt a surge of relief, but the tense standoff left him with a sinking feeling. The battle was far from over. In the days that followed, the conflict between the Williamsons and the Oakwood Homeowners Association only intensified. Karen Simmons, fuming from her failed attempt to cut off the farm's power, redoubled her efforts to have the rooster removed. She bombarded the HOA with a steady stream of angry emails and phone calls, demanding immediate action. Melissa Flores, caught between her obligation to uphold the HOA's rules and her reluctance to compromise the Williamsons' rights, found herself in an increasingly precarious position. "This is getting out of hand," Melissa sighed, rubbing her temples as she reviewed the latest missive from Karen. "I can't keep placating her without crossing the line into harassment or abuse of power." One evening, as Jacob was locking up the chicken coop, he heard the unmistakable sound of a vehicle approaching. Turning, he was startled to see a large truck emblazoned with the logo of a pest control company rumbling down the driveway. Panic rising in his chest, Jacob rushed to intercept the truck, his heart pounding. "What do you think you're doing?" he shouted, his voice laced with fury. The driver, a burly man in a jumpsuit, fixed Jacob with an unapologetic stare. "We've been called to the Simmons residence to deal with a rooster problem. Seems your neighbors had enough of the noise." Jacob's blood boiled. "Over my dead body. This is my farm, and that rooster is mine. You're not taking him anywhere." The driver shrugged. "Look, man, I'm just doing my job. If you've got a problem, take it up with the HOA." Just then, Melissa Flores emerged from the shadows, her face grim. "I'm afraid I can't allow this, gentlemen," she said, her voice firm. "There's an ongoing legal dispute regarding the rooster, and the HOA has no authority to intervene in this manner." The driver's eyes narrowed. "Well, that's not what we were told." Mrs. Simmons assured us that the HOA had approved this action. Melissa shook her head. "I'm sorry, but that's simply not true. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately." As the pest control truck reluctantly retreated, Jacob turned to Melissa, his expression a mix of gratitude and concern. "This has got to stop. Karen is clearly not going to back down, and the HOA is caught in the middle. How much longer can this go on?" Melissa sighed heavily. "I'm afraid the situation is coming to a head, Mr. Williamson. We need to find a resolution, and soon, before someone does something they'll regret." The following week, Jacob and Sarah sat across from their lawyer, their faces etched with worry. The legal battle against the Oakwood Homeowners Association had been arduous and costly, and they were rapidly running out of options. "The judge has agreed to hear our case," the lawyer began, his tone somber. "However, the HOA is putting up a fierce fight. They're claiming that the rooster's crowing constitutes a legitimate nuisance and that their actions are well within their authority." Jacob's brow furrowed. "But that's not fair. We've done everything we can to minimize the noise, and the HOA is just bowing to the demands of one resident." The lawyer nodded. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Williamson. Unfortunately, the law can be a complex and unpredictable beast. The judge may very well side with the HOA, especially if they can demonstrate a pattern of complaints and a genuine effort to find a resolution. Sarah reached out and squeezed Jacob's hand. What can we do? We can't afford to lose this farm, and we certainly can't afford to keep fighting this battle in court. The lawyer paused, his expression thoughtful. There may be one option, but it's a risky one. You could try to negotiate a settlement with the HOA and Mrs. Stimmons. Jacob's eyes widened. A settlement? After all they put us through, why should we compromise? Because the alternative could be far worse, the lawyer replied. If the judge rules in favor of the HOA, you could face hefty fines or even the loss of your farm. A settlement, while not ideal, may be the best way to preserve your livelihood. Jacob's shoulders slumped, and he sighed heavily. I don't like it, but I suppose we don't have much choice. What kind of settlement are we talking about? The lawyer leaned forward, his expression grave. It would likely involve you finding a permanent solution for the rooster, whether that means relocating him or finding another way to address the noise issue. The HOA and Mrs. Simmons would also expect some form of financial compensation for the disruption. Jacob felt his stomach twist with dread. So, essentially, we'd be paying them to leave us alone. The lawyer nodded. I'm afraid so. It's an unsavory proposition, but it may be the only way to avoid an even worse outcome. Jacob and Sarah exchanged a weighted look, both of them wrestling with the implications of this potential compromise. The fight was far from over, and the future of their farm hung in the balance. Tension filled the air as Jacob and Sarah sat across the table from Karen Simmons and the Oakwood Homeowners Association representatives. The negotiations for a settlement had been tense and acrimonious, with both sides digging in their heels. We're not paying you a single penny, Jacob said, his voice laced with defiance. This is our farm, our livelihood, and we've done nothing wrong. Karen's eyes narrowed. That's where you're wrong, Mr. Williamson. Your rooster has been a constant nuisance, disrupting the peace and quiet of this neighborhood. The HOA has a responsibility to address the concerns of its residents. Melissa Flores, the HOA president, cleared her throat. We're willing to be reasonable, Mr. Williamson. If you agree to find a permanent solution for the rooster and cover the costs associated with the dispute, we can avoid any further legal action. Jacob's jaw tightened. And what exactly do you consider a permanent solution? Getting rid of my rooster altogether. Karen jumped in, a triumphant gleam in her eye. That would be the ideal outcome. Yes. We're not asking for much, just the peace and quiet that every homeowner in this neighborhood deserves. Sarah placed a hand on Jacob's arm, her expression pleading. Honey, please. We can't afford another legal battle. Maybe we can find a compromise that works for everyone. Jacob's shoulders slumped, and he let out a heavy sigh. Fine. What kind of deal are you proposing? Melissa cleared her throat. We're willing to drop the fines and citations, provided you agree to relocate the rooster to a farm outside the neighborhood. In exchange, we'll cover the cost of the relocation and provide a one-time payment to compensate you for the destruction. Jacob's eyes narrowed. And how much are you offering? Karen spoke up, a smug smile on her face. $5,000 to be paid upon the successful removal of the rooster. Jacob felt his heart sink. $5,000, while a significant sum, was a mere fraction of what the rooster was worth to his farm's operations. He exchanged a troubled glance with Sarah, silently weighing their options. After a long, tense silence, Jacob spoke up. All right, we'll do it, but I want the payment in writing, and I want the rooster relocated to a reputable farm where he'll be well cared for. Karen's smile widened. Excellent. We have a deal then. As the meeting adjourned, Jacob and Sarah walked back to their car, their faces etched with a mixture of resignation and defeat. The fight was over, but at what cost? The day of the rooster's relocation was a somber one for the Williamson family. Jacob had carefully selected a well-regarded farm just outside the city limits, where the rooster would be allowed to live out his days in peace. As the truck carrying the crate with the rooster pulled away, Jacob stood on the porch, his eyes fixed on the receding vehicle. Sarah came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. "I'm sorry, honey," she said softly. "I know how much that rooster meant to you and the farm." Jacob sighed heavily. "It just doesn't feel right, you know. We fought so hard, and in the end, we had to give in to Karen and the HOA." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I know, but at least we were able to find him a good home. And the money from the settlement will help us get through this rough patch." Jacob nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "It's not about the money, Sarah. It's about principle, about standing up for what's right. I feel like we've compromised our values, our way of life, just to appease a bunch of entitled neighbors." Sarah didn't have an answer. She simply pulled Jacob into a comforting embrace, letting him vent his frustration and disappointment. In the days that followed, the Williamsons worked to adapt to their new reality. They used the settlement money to make some much-needed repairs around the farm, and Jacob even began exploring the possibility of adding a new livestock to their operation. But the shadow of the rooster's departure lingered, a constant reminder of the battle they had lost. As they went about their daily routines, Jacob and Sarah couldn't help but wonder if they had made the right decision, or if they had simply traded their principles for a temporary respite. Only time would tell if the sacrifices they had made would be worth it in the long run. For now, they could only hope that the peace and quiet they had purchased would be worth the price they had paid.